Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined, they're real. Northampton isn't loud about tragedy. It's the kind of place where a quiet street is supposed to stay quiet. On Monday, July 17, 2000, a mother and her husband turned a key at a terraced house in Standon's barn because a week of silence had started to feel like a message. Inside, routine had stopped mid-sentence. Police arrived fast, secured the doorway, and logged the entry. What they found never changes in this case and will not change later in this series. Downstairs, an adult woman, Claire, 31, and one of the family's poodles were found deceased. Upstairs, in separate bedrooms, Kieran, 8, and Jade, 7, lay still in their beds. Officers set a hard perimeter, taped the thresholds, and began a scene log. There was one home, one interior, one timeline. No second location would emerge later. The first hour followed standard procedure. Crime scene specialists photographed every room, recorded ambient temperature, and noted indicators of elapsed time, unopened post, undisturbed surfaces, a week of unanswered knocks. The kitchen and living area were mapped, the staircase and landing were documented for footprints and trace. Bedrooms were treated as primary subscenes, each bagged and labeled by sequence. Evidence markers went down beside domestic items that, in any other context, would be ordinary. Here, they were data points. Paramedics confirmed what the heir had already told the neighbors: there was nothing to be done. The coroner was notified. Officers contacted Child Protection and Family Liaison, protocol that moves as quietly as it is necessary. The house remained the anchor. Forensic staff avoided speculation, they recorded what they could see. On Claire, there were visible signs consistent with severe blunt force trauma and further assault, though specifics would be detailed later by pathology. With the children, position and presentation suggested little or no struggle in the bedrooms. Those are clinical sentences. They are also the reason this case leaves a mark on anyone who works it. From here, the work split along two tracks. Inside, technicians swept for trace, fibers, prints, transfer patterns, while detectives began the last normal day reconstruction, school pickups, takeaway habits, phone activity, door-to-door checks. Outside, the message to the public was deliberate and limited. Police were seeking the husband to assist inquiries. That phrasing matters. Early on, you don't rush beyond the evidence. You keep the language clean, you follow the facts. In towns like this, murders aren't just crimes, they tear at the fabric of a quiet community. It's a line you hear because it's true, and because it points to why small changes, missed calls, a dark window, should never be ignored. The first chapter of any investigation is about controlling what you think you know and building only what the scene can carry. Here, the house carried everything: the layout, the silence, and the first reliable timestamps on a week that went missing. The first full day after the discovery wasn't spent guessing motive. It was spent defining the people, the habits, and the map. Investigators started with who lived here and how their days usually ran. Claire Austin, 31. 2 children, Kieran, 8, and Jade, 7, a terraced home on the Standon's Barn estate in Northampton, England. Schools were contacted, attendance registers pulled. Teachers confirmed both children had been present the prior week until a sudden gap. That gap mattered. It set a boundary on when normal life stopped. Detectives tightened the frame using simple anchors viewers recognize: phone activity, takeaway receipts, neighbor checks, and routine commitments. A local fish and chips purchase in that window, consistent with what the family often ate, became one of the last ordinary timestamps. Door to door, neighbors described a household that kept to itself: school runs, a working schedule for the adults, 2 small dogs regularly seen in the garden. Routines are easy to overlook until they end. Here, every missed call and unopened letter supported the same conclusion: whatever happened began about a week before the bodies were found on Monday, July 17, 2000. The Family Liaison team built a concise biography for each victim, because clarity prevents drift later. Claire's friends described her as practical and reliable. The children were described the way children usually are when a case like this breaks: bright, energetic, attached to patterns that make a school week feel predictable. Detectives logged those statements, but they did not lean on them to explain anything. This wasn't about character. It was about sequence. When was the last verified sighting, who made it, and what was observed? Mapping came next. Standon's barn connects quickly to routes leading north toward the coast. That detail wasn't a theory, it was a fact of geography that would matter if the person police were seeking to assist inquiries had left Northampton by car. Patrol briefings included a simple diagram: home location, nearest trunk roads, service stations within the first 60 to 90 minutes drive. For a case that would soon involve sightings outside the county, this base map was the first practical tool, not a plot device. Inside the house, the forensic team's notes from day one were converted into a case card summary: body locations already fixed, rooms labeled by number, and evidence bags indexed to each room. That gave detectives a clean way to talk to the public without contaminating the record. When media asked if police were working multiple scenes, the answer stayed the same: one residence. When asked whether there was a break-in, detectives didn't speculate, they stuck to what had been confirmed and kept unconfirmed points off camera. In towns like this, murders aren't just crimes, they tear at the fabric of a quiet community. The best service you can offer that community is accuracy. By late afternoon, investigators had a workable last normal day. It was built from routine: school pickup, a takeaway, expected evening rhythms. Phones that usually moved through a handful of contacts went silent. The post piled. A friend who normally got a quick callback did not. The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem, one detective said later. Clean alignment can tempt you to overread. Here, it was used correctly, to set the earliest likely window of death at around July 10th, without inventing what occurred minute by minute. The case card also listed immediate next steps: verify banking activity for any late transactions, pull CCTV where available on feeder roads, and confirm whether the vehicle registered to the household had crossed fuel stations in the region. None of that proves a narrative on its own. It reduces noise. The team avoided grand theories and focused on confirmations. If a camera caught a plate, it went on the board. If a card pinged a pump, it was timestamped. If nothing appeared, that absence was noted as well. Not all leads are positive, some are vacuum, and vacuums can be useful. There was also a human dimension the file had to respect. The family liaison officers balanced essential updates with the reality of grief. Names would not be broadcast until next of kin protocols were complete. Contesting rumor protects future prosecution choices and protects the victims from being turned into story beats. Claire was a daughter and a mother before she was a case subject. The children were students before they were evidence numbers. True crime viewers understand this balance. We can look at hard facts and still acknowledge the people those facts describe. By nightfall, the investigation had a skeleton it could stand on: 3 victims identified, a single residence locked as the scene, a last ordinary day bounded by reliable markers, and a public notice that police needed to speak with the husband as part of standard inquiries. No cliffhangers, no side plots. Just a clean platform for the next phase, turning routine into trace and trace into movement. The day after the scene was sealed, Northamptonshire detectives handed the lead evidence bags to a home office pathologist and the force's senior crime scene manager. No speeches, no theories, just chain of custody, timestamps, and a working plan: identify instruments, establish sequence, and fix an earliest credible time of death. In a homicide that lives inside one address, you start by letting the house speak. The kitchen lounge level was cleared first for controlled examination. Technicians photographed patterned injuries visible on Claire Austin, 31, then measured spatter geometry and contact transfers on nearby surfaces. A rubber mallet recovered from the home was swabbed and packaged. 2 domestic knives were lifted the same way. The ligature used on the adult was documented in situ, then removed under video to preserve knot form and any trace. The order wasn't dramatic, but it mattered: weapons, ligature, then cuts, 3 steps that would later align with pathology. The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. Clean doesn't mean simple, it means testable. Upstairs, each child's bedroom was treated as a separate primary subscene. Kieran, 8, and Jade, 7, were found in bed, bedding undisturbed beyond what you would expect from movement after the fact. No rummaged drawers, no obvious signs of struggle. That observation alone didn't answer why there was no resistance, it only narrowed possibilities. To resolve it, the pathologist ordered rapid toxicology on preserved blood and vitreous samples. Results would take time. Until they landed, detectives worked with a careful phrase. Findings were consistent with the children being sedated before being strangled. Consistent is not conjecture, it's the word you use when seeing presentation and common medical pathways line up without overreach. The 2 poodles were examined as well, one downstairs near the adult victim and a second accounted for by officers managing removal. Both showed blunt force injuries. In many jurisdictions, violence to pets is a distressing but evidentially relevant signal. It can indicate sequence, escalation, or an offender's intent to eliminate noise. Here, the veterinary postmortem was ordered, not for spectacle, but to timeline the house. In towns like this, murders aren't just crimes, they tear at the fabric of a quiet community. When the victims include children and animals, that fabric shows every rip. Back at the lab, early pathology established a 3-stage assault on Claire, blunt force trauma compatible with the mallet, ligature strangulation consistent with the seized garment, and sharp force injuries compatible with the recovered knives. Wound margins and hemorrhage patterns suggested the blunt force event came first, strangulation next, cutting last. That sequence matched what the scene team suspected from the kitchen mapping. No single test proves chronology, convergence does. When crime scene, injury pattern, and instrument type point in one direction, you move forward with it, and you keep checking. Time of death estimation was handled conservatively. With discovery on Monday, July 17, 2000, the pathologist set the likely window to around Monday, July 10, supported by body condition, room temperature records, unopened mail, and witness statements about when routine stopped. Those are not cinematic clues, they are practical anchors. The audience doesn't need a lecture on postmortem interval, they need the date. Is almost equal to July 10th is the date. From the evidence locker, examiners prioritized trace on the mallet handle, the ligature, and the knife grips. The expectation in a domestic scene is mixed profiles and transferable fibers. That doesn't make the work less useful. We don't need miracles, one examiner said later. We need coherence. Coherence came from compatibility, objects present in the home, used in a way that fitted injuries, with no competing second scene to muddy the picture. The house remained the anchor. There would be no late-game reveal of an alleyway, a canal, or a car boot as the primary site. That's how you prevent the 2 different stories problem viewers complain about. Digital forensics started in parallel. Landline and mobile activity were pulled to confirm the silence window. Bank checks and a simple purchase trail, like that fish and chip spend already logged, were lined up against the pathology window. The point wasn't to dramatize a paper bag of food. It was to show that ordinary life stopped at the same horizons the lab was drawing. When routine and science overlap, the investigation tightens. For the public line, nothing changed. Police were still seeking the husband to assist inquiries, and that precise wording held. Inside the team, the working theory hardened, a single residence homicide sequence, adult assaulted first downstairs, children killed upstairs after probable sedation, pets killed by blunt force. That's a grim ledger, but it's the honest one. If you care about community impact, honesty is the first respect you owe. By the end of day 2, detectives had what they needed to move. Instruments were identified and packaged. Sequence was supported by both scene and lab indicators. Earliest likely time of death was fixed to is almost equal to July 10th. There was no second location, no competing narrative. The next chapter of the case would leave the house and follow movement, roads out of Northampton, tips from the coast, and a vehicle that didn't stay put. You can learn a lot from a normal day when it's the last one that ran as expected. After the house was secured and the first lab work cued, detectives rebuilt the family's final routine that still looked like life. School confirmed that Kieran, 8, and Jade, 7, were present in the early part of the week before the Monday, July 17, 2000 discovery. A brief run of attendance, then absence. Teachers remembered the children leaving without distress on the prior school day. Nothing flagged them for welfare concerns then. Friends of Claire Austin, 31, described a standard evening plan: home, a simple meal, bedtime. The investigation didn't need adjectives. It needed markers. Bank checks showed small, ordinary spending consistent with that pattern, a takeaway purchase that matched what neighbors often saw the family bring home. The time on that till slip lined up with the window the pathologist later fixed, around Monday, July 10th. The phone side told the same story. Household calls that would typically bounce through a handful of contacts went quiet after that date. No long gaps followed by a flurry. Just a clean stop. The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. Clean alignment can tempt conclusions. Here it was used to tighten the frame and move the case forward. Door to door, officers collected the last verified sightings. A quick hello at the garden gate, children with school bags, 2 small dogs visible, curtains drawn at a usual hour. Nothing in those contacts signaled a crisis brewing. That lack of visible disturbance matters. It explained why no one forced a check earlier and why the welfare entry on July 17 felt shocking rather than inevitable. In towns like this, murders aren't just crimes, they tear at the fabric of a quiet community. Routine is the fabric. When it tears, you look at the first loose stitch. With the last ordinary day fixed, detectives pivoted from inside the house to the roads leaving Standon's barn. Geography is neutral, but it narrows options. The location connects quickly to trunk routes running north toward the coast. Patrol briefings mapped a 60 to 90-minute ring from the address, primary filling stations, roundabouts with cameras, and service areas most likely to capture a plate or a silhouette. This wasn't guesswork. It was the practical next step once your seeing work says the crime happened days earlier and whoever you need to speak to may be moving. CCTV availability in 2000 was limited compared to today, but not absent. Managers at several service stations kept tapes long enough for police to pull segments from the relevant dates. Some were too degraded to help. Others provided usable frames, vehicles passing through near the time window supported by the family's last normal spending. Meanwhile, automatic number plate recognition wasn't widespread, so investigators leaned on human memory with care: clerks, attendants, overnight staff. No one was expected to recall faces from a week back on a busy forecourt. They were asked for specifics, time ranges, payment quirks, anything that could be verified on paper. At the same time, the vehicle registered to the household was prioritized. Checks went out for roadside sightings beyond Northamptonshire, and potential matches began to cluster along a line toward Blackpool and Scarborough. That doesn't make a narrative by itself, it makes a direction. The case card updated with each confirmation, location, time, whether a clip or receipt backed it up. When a tip lacked documentation, it stayed in a separate column until something else supported it. This is how you avoid 2 stories later. You keep one board and one standard for what counts as confirmed. Inside the team, the wording used with the public stayed deliberate. Police were seeking the husband to assist inquiries. That kept the lines open. It also kept the process fair. Investigators knew the community would carry this case for years, and that respect starts with language that doesn't outrun evidence. The aim wasn't to script a suspect on camera. It was to find out who, when, and how, using dates, directions, and corroboration. The last ordinary day gave detectives something simple but powerful, a line they could draw across the calendar and along the road network. On one side, you have a family moving through its habits. On the other, silence. Every solid step now had to cross that line: purchase to pump, pump to road, road to coast. It's not dramatic, but it's how you build a case that won't snap under scrutiny. And when the pathologist's early window is almost equal to July 10th, matched the receipts and the phone silence, the board stopped looking like guesswork and started looking like a route. For viewers who care about the human part, this is also where a case can honor the people at the center without turning them into scenery. Claire's reliability, the children's school rhythm, the dogs in the garden, those details are not here to make you feel more. They're here because they anchor what comes next. If you can picture the last ordinary day, you can recognize the first day that wasn't. The next move would send officers farther from Northampton. Calls were queued to coastal forces, shared logs were opened for cross-checking. A vehicle that did not stay put was becoming the case's most useful witness. The house had finished speaking. The road was about to start. Once the last ordinary day was fixed around July 10, 2000, the investigation left the house and followed the roads. Detectives pushed a clean request to regional forces for any footage or logs that might place the family car beyond Standon's barn after that date. This was the year 2000, no nationwide plate network, limited digital storage, so the strategy was simple: fuel, food, and cameras that still kept tapes long enough to matter. Absence can be evidence, but a timestamp is better. The first workable hit came from a service station within an hour's drive north of Northampton. A manager handed over a tape section until records covering the same half hour. The video wasn't cinematic, it didn't need to be. You could see a vehicle matching the make and color linked to the household pull through, pause at the pump canopy, and roll on. The receipt stack showed a small fuel purchase in that window. The name on the card, time, and pump number aligned with the pathologist's window and the micro-timeline already set. One confirmation doesn't make a route, but it opens the map. From there, the team leapfrogged along the corridor toward the coast. Investigators called ahead to 3 more service stations further north. 2 had already overwritten their tapes. The third had partial coverage, grainy but usable enough to confirm the same model moving through later the same day. Staff didn't recognize the driver by face, no one expected them to after a week. What mattered was the clock. When timestamps stack in order, you keep going. Cash and card checks filled some gaps. Banking activity linked to the household was light after the is almost equal to July 10th cutoff, but not non-existent. A modest card authorization appeared along the same corridor the following day. On its own, a small spend could be noise. Paired with 2 video sightings, it stopped being a stray. Detectives added it to the case board with the same rule they'd used from the start: confirmed items on one line, unconfirmed tips on another. This is how you tell one story, not 2. The picture forming wasn't dramatic: car, road, pump, road, but it was linear, and it pointed in the same direction that late tips had suggested, north toward the coast. The kind of path that ends in places like Blackpool or Scarborough if you keep driving. Patrol briefings shifted tone accordingly. Instead of a wide net around Northampton, radio traffic now flagged service corridors leading into those seaside towns. Lodgings that took walk-ins were asked to check registries from the relevant dates. Local officers knew which ghost houses still wrote entries by hand. You don't invent clever, you ask the right people. In parallel, detectives checked for traffic stops or breakdown calls that might have touched the registered vehicle. None. Motorway patrols had nothing to add. That absence didn't derail the work, it was consistent with a quiet drive that avoided attention. Meanwhile, the press office kept language steady. Police were seeking the husband to assist inquiries. No chase narrative, no motive theories. The case didn't need drift. It needed the next anchor. Blackpool produced the next one. A small motel owner had held onto his desk ledger longer than most. Midweek, a first name and a plate fragment were legible enough to matter when read against the inquiry's alerts. The entry lacked ID numbers and didn't match the full registration on file, but the partials were close. The clerk remembered late arrival, cash preferred, no breakfast taken. Nothing loud, nothing strange, just the kind of detail you only get by asking a person who was there. The team requested any CCTV from the street that week. A single exterior camera at a nearby shop showed a vehicle pulling into the block within the right hour. The tape was dark and low-res, you could confirm shape and movement, not a driver's face. Still, the clock stayed on their side. Scarborough surfaced next, not as a sure sighting, but as a cluster of calls that matched timing and direction. Detectives separated those tips into credible with a hook and general impressions. A coastal constable flagged a petrol receipt that hit the same card series used earlier on the corridor north. That placed the same account near Scarborough after Blackpool, in a short run. It wasn't elegant, it was enough to extend the line one more notch. The investigation never promised a perfect trail. It promised a trail that could hold. By now the case had clear momentum without theatrics. A quiet family in Northampton, a single scene confirmed, an ordinary day pinned to is almost equal to July 10th, and a vehicle that didn't stay put. The human cost, Claire, Kieran, Jade, and the dogs, stayed at the center by the way detectives worked, no shortcuts, no leaps. When a case tears at a community, the best answer you can give is control, of language, of evidence, of time. Viewers who follow real investigations know this step feels slow. It is the step that prevents collapse in court. The last action item in this stretch was administrative but crucial: circulate a clear, current description of the vehicle and the person police needed to speak with to coastal forces and Lake District patrols, where people go when they keep driving north. That's not foreshadowing, it's the logic of a map. The next chapter of the case would test whether those circulations, plus one exhausted driver and a car that needed fuel, would finally intersect in real time. The road work paid off. Once the first two service station hits lined up, coastal forces were ready to help. Blackpool was the first town to give something tangible. A small motel just off the front kept a handwritten ledger past the usual turnover. In the week after is almost equal to July 10th, 2000, one entry showed a first name and a partial plate that closely matched the household vehicle. The clerk remembered a late check-in, cash on the counter, and no breakfast the next morning. It wasn't dramatic, but it was usable. Detectives photocopied the page, preserved the original, and logged contact details for court. Street footage near the motel added shape to the entry. A corner shop camera, old and low resolution, captured a car of the right make and color pulling into the block within the time window the clerk gave. You couldn't get a face from it, but you could get a clock. That was enough to treat Blackpool as a verified waypoint. The case board shifted from arrows to timestamps, which is how you keep a story straight. From Blackpool, the line moved northeast. Scarborough had been in the call stack since the first fuel hit, but now it carried more weight. A petrol station outside the town produced a receipt linked to the same card series flagged earlier on the route north. That placed the account near Scarborough shortly after the Blackpool night, proximity that made sense on a quiet, continuous drive. Staff didn't recall the customer beyond, kept to himself, which is what most travelers do. Investigators asked for the pump camera. The unit didn't store long, but a manager provided a daily report showing the pump's active times matched the receipt's minute stamps. The receipt and the timesheet were logged together, a small but solid pair. Police shared a refined description with coastal patrols: make, model, color, and minor distinguishing marks noted from earlier footage. Guesthouse owners along Scarborough's inner streets were contacted the same way they had been in Blackpool, calmly, with direct questions that could be checked. One place thought they had a match on a first name and a similar vehicle, but their ledger was incomplete and the dates didn't hold. The team set it aside. Keeping weak items in a separate column is how you stop rumor from bleeding into record. What these confirmations gave detectives was movement that didn't loop. The car went north, stayed north, and didn't bounce back into the Midlands. That mattered for deployment. If someone is using cash and small purchases to stay off the radar, you focus on the places that require a pause: motels, fuel, and scenic pull-offs where people sleep in cars. In towns like these, officers know the laybys where travelers stop at night. Patrols were briefed to treat those pull-offs as quiet checkpoints. It's not aggressive police work. It's patient police work. Cross-force coordination intensified. Northern forces opened a shared log for fresh sightings. Anything with a timestamp and a second source jumped the queue. A call from a shop near the seafront matched the vehicle's color and shape but had no plate and no purchase. It stayed in the unconfirmed column. Another tip from a diner on the outskirts reported a lone man who seemed exhausted, paying cash and leaving quickly. The staff couldn't connect him to the car with certainty, so detectives noted it and moved on. The line was clear: confirmed route first, impressions second. By the end of this push, the case had a travel corridor that could be explained to a jury without guesswork: Northampton to Blackpool, then Scarborough, underwritten by a ledger entry, footage timestamps, and a petrol receipt. That corridor also pointed to the next logical search area, the Lake District, where drivers looking to disappear often keep moving until they run out of road or sleep. The community impact stayed in frame in a way that respected the victims. Claire, Kieran, and Jade were not being turned into background. Their last week was being accounted for so the law could do its job. When routine stops without warning, patience and precision are the only fair response. The handoff was quietly practical. Patrols in the Lake District received the updated bulletin with the sequence of sightings and a reminder to check laybys at dawn. The car had needed fuel. Now, most likely, it would need rest. The next break wouldn't come from a speech or a hunch. It would come from a patrol officer driving a slow road at the right hour. Dawn patrols in the Lake District were briefed with a simple plan: check laybys, services, and quiet pull-offs where a tired driver might stop. Hours after those bulletins went out, a unit rolling a narrow road came across a car that matched the circulated make and color. No lights, no movement inside, windows faint with condensation from the cold morning. Officers approached, announced, and confirmed a single occupant behind the wheel. He was conscious, pale, with self-inflicted wrist injuries that needed attention but didn't stop the conversation that follows in cases like this: identity, welfare, and immediate medical support. Paramedics took over, stabilized, and transported. The car was sealed. Chain of custody started in the gravel. Once the hospital cleared him for interview, the status changed. Police had moved from seeking the husband to assist inquiries to arrest on suspicion of murder, a precise step that follows evidence rather than emotion. The arrest time and location were logged to the minute. Personal items were inventoried. The vehicle was recovered to a secure bay for search under warrant: interior swabs, floor mats, boot lining, and any trace transfer that might speak to movement between Northampton and the coast. You don't promise what you'll find in a car that has been on the road for days. You gather, you preserve, and you let the lab decide what's signal and what's noise. At the custody suite, the process ran by the book. Rights were read. Duty solicitor availability was confirmed. Interview rooms were prepped with the basics: recording equipment checked, materials from the house scene ready for reference, and a strict outline that would keep the conversation on track: timeline, movements, contacts, and the period between is almost equal to July 10th and July 17th, 2000. Detectives didn't push motive in the first sit-down. They pushed sequence. You solve the calendar first, then the why. Back on the roads, officers traced the Lake District approach in reverse, canvassing fuel points that might still have records. A few had Saturday staff who remembered the weather more than the customers. That's normal. What mattered is that the already confirmed corridor, Northampton-Blackpool-Scarborough, now ended in a parked car and a named person in custody who could be asked, under caution, where he had been and why he had not made contact. Everything the team had locked in prior chapters: a single residential scene, a last ordinary day is almost equal to July 10th, and a route that didn't loop, was now the spine of an interview strategy. The search of the vehicle focused on small things that hold their value: paper fragments, receipts that slipped under a seat rail, a snapped thread, a stain on a belt edge, a fiber caught in a trunk seam. In 2000 you didn't have cloud histories or smart car logs. You had mileage, fuel, and what people leave behind when they live in a car for a few days. For viewers who want the human truth without theatrics, this is one of the most difficult parts to watch from the outside. A family is gone. The person closest to them is found alone, injured, and silent about the past week. You don't fix that with a speech. You fix it by documenting everything that moves and everything that doesn't. Public communications shifted with the legal position. The force confirmed an arrest in the Lake District in connection with the Northampton investigation and stressed that inquiries were ongoing. No allegation of guilt, no press conference speculation. Families were updated by liaison officers before headlines moved. In towns like these, murders aren't just crimes, they tear at the fabric of a quiet community. Respect is part of the repair, and it starts with telling the truth only when it's verified. Inside the interview room, the questions were narrow: confirm identity, confirm the car, account for the dates, explain the route north, and state whether any third parties were involved. Answers would matter in later chapters. For now, the clean takeaway is this: the line of travel ends in an arrest that can be explained to a jury with clocks and maps, not drama. The work returns to the lab, and the case moves from pursuit to charge. The arrest in the Lake District ended the search and began the prosecution. Northamptonshire detectives packaged one clear case: a single residential crime scene in Standon's barn, a tight death window of around Monday, July 10, 2000, and a verified travel line north that stopped with a car and a man found at dawn. The Crown Prosecution Service reviewed the file and authorized multiple counts of murder. Court moved the way homicide cases do in England, methodically. In March 2001, Philip Austin appeared and pleaded guilty to the murders of Claire Austin, 31, and their children Kieran, 8, and Jade, 7. The judge imposed 3 concurrent life sentences with a minimum term of 20 years. That is the sentence of record. It means Austin's punishment is life. The 20-year minimum is the earliest point the parole board can review risk. It is not a release date. After July 2020, Austin became eligible for review. In 2021 and again in 2023, the parole board recommended transfer to an open prison, a lower security setting used to test long-term prisoners. Those were not recommendations to release him into the community. On both occasions, the Justice Secretary blocked the move on public safety grounds. Families opposed any relaxation. As of today, October 23, 2025, Austin remains in closed conditions. He has not been released. That is the ending, and there is only one. No second scene, no alternate outcome. The legal record is plain. Philip Austin pleaded guilty in March 2001 and received 3 concurrent life sentences with a minimum term of 20 years. He has not been released. Parole board recommendations in 2021 and 2023 were to move him to an open prison, not to free him, and those moves were blocked. He remains in custody. Keeping it exact matters because this case devastated a family and shook a quiet town. Precision is a form of respect, first for Claire, Kieran, and Jade, and then for the people who still live with the aftermath. If there is a lesson to carry forward without preaching, it's this: when routine breaks and a household goes silent, act. Welfare checks, neighbor calls, school follow-ups, small steps save time, and time is often the only thing an investigation can't win back. Our series promised a single narrative and delivered one: discovery on July 17, 2000, a house that told the truth, lab work that fixed the sequence, a last ordinary day that pointed to the road, confirmations through Blackpool and Scarborough, interception in the Lake District, and a courtroom in March 2001 where the law concluded what the evidence began. The status in 2025 is not a twist. It is custody. I'll keep this brief. Telling Claire, Kieran, and Jade's story reminded me why community matters. When routines break, say something. A call, a knock, a welfare check can save time, and sometimes lives. Justice is the court's work, vigilance is ours. If this case moved you, tell me what lesson you're taking with you. If you disagree, say why, respectfully. Drop a comment with where you're watching from, and what you'd have done differently. If this video helped or challenged you, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next case, and share it with someone who might need the reminder.